The dust swirled around the weathered boots of Samuel Hayes as he stood on the wooden steps of Cedar Creek's only church. In his weathered hands, he held the small, trembling form of 8-year-old Moses, a boy whose dark skin glistened with sweat under the harsh Texas sun. The child's eyes, wide with a mixture of hope and fear, looked up at the imposing figure of Preacher Thornton, who stood blocking the church doorway like a stone wall. "I said no, Hayes." Preacher Thornton's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. His black coat flapped in the wind as he crossed his arms over his chest. "This house of God ain't meant for his kind. Find yourself another preacher, another town, another solution. But not here, not in my church." Samuel's jaw tightened, the muscles in his face working as he fought to keep his composure. He had ridden 20 miles from his ranch with Moses, the boy he had found 3 weeks ago, wandering the desert, half dead from thirst and starvation. The child had lost everything, his parents to disease, his siblings to the harsh realities of a world that showed no mercy to those born with dark skin. "In 1887 Texas, this boy needs baptizing," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "He's got as much right to God's grace as any white child in this town. Maybe more, considering what he's been through." The preacher's eyes narrowed, scanning the small crowd that had begun to gather. Women in their Sunday best whispered behind gloved hands, while men in dusty work clothes shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Cedar Creek was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Samuel Hayes was well respected. His ranch was one of the largest in the county, and his word carried weight, but this was different. "The Bible is clear about the natural order of things," Preacher Thornton proclaimed, his voice rising so the gathered crowd could hear every word. "Each creature to its own kind, each race to its proper place. I won't defile this sacred space by mixing what the Lord intended to keep separate." Moses pressed closer to Samuel, his small fingers clutching the rancher's leather vest. The boy had barely spoken since Samuel found him, but his eyes spoke volumes. They held the kind of pain that aged a person beyond their years, the kind of suffering that could either break a spirit completely or forge it into something unbreakable. Samuel looked down at the child and felt something shift in his chest, something that had been growing stronger each day since he brought Moses home. It wasn't pity, it wasn't charity. It was something deeper, something that reminded him of how he had felt when he first held his own son James, now grown and living in California. "You know what, preacher?" Samuel's voice carried a new tone, one that made several people in the crowd take a step closer. "You're right about one thing. This boy don't need your kind of baptizing. He don't need your narrow interpretation of God's love, but he does need something, and I aim to give it to him." Samuel knelt down beside Moses, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something important was about to happen. Even the wind seemed to still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. "Moses," Samuel said softly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet, "I want you to listen to me real careful. This man here, he speaks for a God that's too small, too mean, too petty to be the real thing. The real God, the one who made the stars and the mountains and the rivers. He don't care what color your skin is. He cares what's in your heart." The boy nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Samuel's face. "And you know what else?" Samuel continued, standing up and placing his hand firmly on Moses' shoulder. "From this day forward, you ain't an orphan no more. You got a name, you got a home, and you got a father. Moses Hayes, that's who you are now. My son." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. In all his 62 years, Samuel Hayes had never been known for grand gestures or emotional displays. He was a practical man. A quiet man, a man who let his actions speak louder than his words. But standing there in the dust outside that church, with a rejected child at his side and a preacher's hatred staring him in the face, Samuel Hayes found his voice. "Now," Samuel said, turning his attention back to Preacher Thornton, "if you won't baptize my son in your church, then I reckon we'll find our own way to God. Come on, Moses, let's go home." As they walked away from the church, father and son, the crowd began to murmur. Some voices carried approval, others disapproval, but all carried surprise. Samuel Hayes had just done something that would be talked about in Cedar Creek for years to come. Behind them, Preacher Thornton stood in his doorway, watching them go. His face was red with anger, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. He had expected Samuel to back down, to accept his authority as God's representative in Cedar Creek. Instead, the old rancher had done something far more dangerous. He had chosen love over tradition, family over social convention, and in doing so, he had planted a seed that might just change everything. Moses looked up at Samuel as they walked toward their horses. "Mr. Samuel," the boy said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "did you mean it about me being your son?" Samuel stopped walking and knelt down again, taking both of Moses' small hands in his large, calloused ones. "Son," he said, and the word carried a weight that seemed to settle something deep in both their hearts. "I never meant anything more in my whole life." As they rode away from Cedar Creek, the dust cloud behind them seemed to carry more than just dirt. It carried the promise of change, the possibility of redemption, and the beginning of a story that would test the very foundations of what people believed about family, faith, and the courage to do what's right when the whole world seems to be watching. The preacher's refusal had been meant to keep things the way they were. Instead, it had set in motion something that would transform two lives forever. 3 months had passed since that dusty morning outside Cedar Creek's church, and the Hayes Ranch had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Moses had grown stronger, his once hollow cheeks now filled out from regular meals, and his eyes brighter with the security of belonging somewhere. But the real changes ran deeper than physical recovery. Samuel watched from the porch as Moses worked alongside the ranch hands, learning to rope and brand cattle with a determination that reminded the old rancher of himself at that age. The boy had a natural way with horses, speaking to them in soft tones that seemed to calm even the wildest mustangs. It was a gift that earned him respect among the cowboys, men who judged others not by the color of their skin but by their skill and character. "That boy's got something special," said Jake Morrison, Samuel's foreman, as he joined his boss on the porch. Jake was a grizzled veteran of countless cattle drives, a man whose opinion carried weight throughout the territory. Horses trust him, like he was born speaking their language. Samuel nodded, pride swelling in his chest. "He's got his grandfather's touch. Moses told me his granddaddy could gentle any horse, no matter how wild." The peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of approaching hooves. A small group of riders emerged from the dust cloud, led by Mayor Hutchins, and followed by several prominent townspeople, including Preacher Thornton. Samuel's jaw tightened as he recognized the delegation. "Trouble coming," Jake muttered, but Samuel was already walking down the porch steps to meet them. "Morning, Mayor," Samuel said, his voice neutral but wary. "What brings you all the way out here?" Mayor Hutchins, a portly man who sweated profusely even in mild weather, mopped his brow with a handkerchief before speaking. "Samuel, we need to talk. There's been concerns raised about the situation here on your ranch." "What kind of concerns?" Samuel's voice carried a warning that made the horses shift nervously. Preacher Thornton urged his horse forward, his black coat making him look like a crow among sparrows. "The kind of concerns that arise when Christian men abandon their proper responsibilities to God and society," he said, his voice dripping with self-righteousness. "That boy needs to be in a proper place, with his own people, not pretending to be something he can never be." Moses had appeared at the corner of the barn, drawn by the voices. Samuel caught sight of him and felt his protective instincts flare. "That boy has a name, preacher, Moses Hayes, and he's right where he belongs." "Now, Samuel," Mayor Hutchins said, trying to play peacemaker. "Nobody's questioning your Christian charity, but folks in town are talking. They're saying it ain't natural what you've done. They're worried about precedents being set." Samuel looked around at the faces before him, reading the mixture of discomfort, disapproval, and barely concealed fear. These were men who had known him for decades, who had relied on his strength and wisdom in difficult times. Now they stood before him like strangers, united in their opposition to his choice to love a child who needed love. "Precedents," Samuel repeated slowly. "You mean the precedent of treating a child like he matters? The precedent of giving an orphan a home and a name? Tell me, Mayor, what exactly scares you about that?" "It ain't about fear," Preacher Thornton interjected. "It's about the natural order, about keeping things the way God intended. That boy will never truly belong in our world, Samuel. You're doing him no favors by pretending otherwise." Samuel felt something cold and dangerous settle in his stomach. He had faced down rustlers and wild animals, had survived droughts and harsh winters, but he had never felt a rage quite like this. It was the fury of a father protecting his child, magnified by the righteousness of his cause. "You want to talk about God's intentions?" Samuel's voice rose, carrying across the ranch yard and drawing the attention of every cowboy within hearing distance. "Let me tell you what I think God intended. I think He intended for that boy to survive in the desert long enough for me to find him. I think He intended for me to have room in my heart and my home for a son who needed both. And I think He intended for me to stand here today and tell you all to get off my land." The delegation shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Samuel Hayes was not a man to cross lightly, and his ranch was not only successful but employed half the county. His economic influence was considerable, and his reputation for fairness had made him an unofficial leader in the community for years. Moses stepped forward then, his young voice clear in the tense silence. "Mr. Samuel," he said, using the formal address he had maintained, despite Samuel's repeated invitations to call him father. "Maybe I should go. I don't want to cause you trouble with your people." Samuel turned to look at the boy, seeing in his eyes the same resigned acceptance that had been there the day they met outside the church. It was the look of someone who had learned not to expect too much from the world, someone who was always prepared to be rejected and abandoned. "Moses," Samuel said, his voice gentle but firm, "come here, son." The boy walked over, and Samuel placed his hand on Moses' shoulder, the same gesture he had made 3 months ago in front of the church. But this time, it felt different. It felt permanent. "These gentlemen seem to think you don't belong here," Samuel said, speaking to Moses, but looking directly at Preacher Thornton. "What do you think about that?" Moses looked around at the ranch, at the corrals where he had learned to rope, at the bunkhouse where the cowboys had taught him card games and told him stories, at the house where Samuel had given him his own room and his own place at the table. "This is my home," Moses said simply. "You're my father. I belong wherever you are." Samuel felt tears prick his eyes, but he blinked them away. "That's right, son. And anybody who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." The delegation exchanged glances, recognizing the futility of their mission. Samuel Hayes had made his choice, and nothing they could say or do would change it. As they turned to leave, Preacher Thornton called out one final warning. "You'll regret this, Hayes. Mark my words, this will bring nothing but trouble to your door." Samuel watched them ride away, then looked down at Moses. "You worried about what he said, son?" Moses shook his head. "No, sir. Trouble's been knocking at my door my whole life. But this is the first time I've had someone standing beside me when I answered it." Samuel smiled, feeling something settle in his chest like a puzzle piece finding its proper place. The preacher was probably right about one thing. There would be trouble ahead. Challenges they would have to face together, but for the first time in years, Samuel Hayes felt like he was exactly where God intended him to be. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories of courage. And family, hit that subscribe button to never miss our incredible true tales. 1 year later, the transformation of both man and boy was complete in ways that even Samuel could not have predicted. Moses had grown taller and stronger, but more importantly, he had grown into himself. The frightened, hollow-eyed child who had once clung to Samuel's vest had become a confident young man who carried himself with quiet dignity and spoke with the wisdom of someone who had known both the worst and best that life could offer. The ranch had prospered beyond all expectations. Word had spread throughout Texas about Samuel Hayes's exceptional way with horses, and buyers came from as far as California to purchase his stock. What they didn't always realize was that much of that success was due to Moses's uncanny ability to understand and communicate with the animals. The boy had a gift that bordered on mystical, and it had made the Hayes Ranch famous throughout the territory. But success brought its own challenges. The more prosperous the ranch became, the more attention it attracted, and not all of that attention was welcome. Samuel was reviewing the books in his study when Moses burst through the door, his usually calm demeanor replaced by urgent excitement. "Pa," Moses said, and Samuel's heart still swelled every time the boy used that word. "There's riders coming, a lot of them, and they don't look friendly." Samuel rose quickly, grabbing his rifle from above the fireplace. Through the window he could see a dust cloud approaching from the east, larger than any they had seen before. As the riders drew closer, Samuel's blood ran cold. There had to be at least 20 men, and he recognized several faces from town, including Preacher Thornton and Mayor Hutchins. But there were others too, strangers with hard faces and the look of men who had come for trouble. "Jake," Samuel called to his foreman, "round up the boys and get them armed. Looks like we've got unwelcome visitors." The ranch hands responded quickly, taking positions around the main buildings with the practiced efficiency of men who had faced danger before. But Samuel could see in their faces that they were outnumbered and outgunned. Whatever was coming, it was going to be the fight of their lives. The riders approached slowly, deliberately, stopping just outside rifle range. Preacher Thornton rode forward alone, his black coat billowing dramatically in the wind. "Samuel Hayes," he called out, "I've come to give you one last chance to do the right thing. Send that boy away and we'll ride out peaceful. Keep him here and face the consequences." Samuel stepped onto his porch, Moses beside him despite Samuel's gesture for him to stay inside. "I told you a year ago, preacher, this is my son and this is his home. If you've got a problem with that, you're welcome to take it up with Judge Morrison in Austin." "There ain't gonna be any judges involved in this," Preacher Thornton replied. "Some matters are too important to leave to courtrooms and legal technicalities. Some matters require direct action from righteous men." Samuel felt Moses tense beside him. The boy's hand moved instinctively toward the gun belt Samuel had given him for his 10th birthday, but Samuel caught his wrist gently. "Not yet, son," Samuel whispered. "Let's see how this plays out." Preacher Thornton raised his voice so everyone could hear. "I brought these men here today because they understand, like I do, that there's a natural order to things that can't be disrupted without consequences. That boy represents everything that's wrong with this changing world, everything that threatens the way things ought to be." "And what way is that, preacher?" Samuel called back. "The way where children die alone in the desert because nobody cares enough to save them. The way where a man's worth is measured by his skin color instead of his character. Is that the way you think God wants things?" One of the strangers, a man with a scar across his cheek and dead eyes, spat in the dust. "Enough talking. We came here to do a job, not listen to speeches." But before anyone could move, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I wouldn't be so hasty if I were you." Everyone turned to see a lone rider approaching from the west, sitting tall in his saddle despite his obvious age. As he drew closer, Samuel's eyes widened in recognition. It was Judge Morrison himself, the territorial judge whose word was law throughout 3 counties. "Your Honor," Mayor Hutchins stammered, clearly not expecting this development. "We didn't know you. We're in the area." Judge Morrison, a silver-haired man with steel-grey eyes and a reputation for absolute fairness, surveyed the scene before him with the calm assessment of someone who had seen every kind of human folly imaginable. "I make it my business to know what's happening in my territory," the judge said, "especially when I hear about groups of armed men riding around playing judge and jury without benefit of legal authority." Preacher Thornton tried to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, surely you understand the importance of maintaining proper social boundaries. This situation represents a dangerous precedent." Judge Morrison dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and dignified. "The only dangerous precedent I see here, preacher, is a group of men with guns trying to intimidate a citizen on his own. Improperty for the crime of caring for an orphaned child." He walked over to Samuel and Moses, studying the boy with the keen eye of someone trained to see through to the truth of things. "This, the young man I've been hearing so much about." "Judge," Morrison asked Samuel, "the one with the gift for horses?" "Yes, sir," Samuel replied. "This is my son, Moses Hayes." Judge Morrison extended his hand to Moses, who took it with the firm grip Samuel had taught him. "Pleased to meet you, son. I've heard remarkable things about your work with horses. They say you have a gift that's beyond ordinary skill." Moses looked up at the judge with clear, honest eyes. "I just listened to them, sir. Most people talk to horses, but not many people listen to what they're trying to say back." Judge Morrison smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in years. "Wisdom beyond your years, young man. Tell me, do you feel like you belong here on this ranch?" "Yes, sir," Moses replied without hesitation. "This is my home, and Mr. Samuel is my father. Not because we share blood, but because we share something stronger. We share love and respect, and the kind of bond that makes a real family." Judge Morrison nodded thoughtfully, then turned to face the assembled group. "Gentlemen, I've heard. All I need to hear. This is a legal adoption, recognized by the territorial government. Samuel Hayes is this boy's legal father, and Moses Hayes is his legal son. Any attempt to interfere with this family relationship will be met with the full force of the law." The scarred stranger started to protest, but Judge Morrison cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "any group of armed men who attempt to take the law into their own hands in my territory will find themselves facing charges of conspiracy, intimidation, and attempted kidnapping. I suggest you all return to your homes before I decide to make some arrests." The standoff dissolved like morning mist. The strangers were the first to leave, followed quickly by the townspeople who suddenly remembered pressing business elsewhere. Soon, only Preacher Thornton remained, his face a mask of frustrated rage. "This isn't over, Hayes," he said quietly. "You can't change the natural order of things just because you have a judge on your side." Samuel looked at the preacher with something that might have been pity. "Preacher, the natural order I believe in is the one where love conquers hate, where family is made by choice as much as blood, and where a man's character matters more than the color of his skin. If you can't see God in that, then maybe you're looking in the wrong place." As Preacher Thornton rode away, defeated and alone, Judge Morrison turned to Samuel and Moses. "You two have created something special here," he said, "a family based on mutual respect and genuine affection. That's rarer than you might think, regardless of race or blood relations." Years later, when Moses Hayes had grown into a man renowned throughout Texas for his way with horses and his integrity in business, people would still talk about the day Samuel Hayes chose love over convention and changed the course of 2 lives forever. The preacher's church eventually stood empty, his congregation having drifted away to find a God who was big enough to embrace all his children. The ranch prospered and became a symbol of what was possible when people chose to see beyond the surface to the heart of what really mattered. Samuel lived to see Moses married to a schoolteacher from San Antonio, lived to hold his grandchildren in his arms, and lived to know that his decision on that dusty day outside a small-town church had created a legacy of love that would endure long after he was gone. On his deathbed, surrounded by family both born and chosen, Samuel Hayes looked at Moses and smiled. "Son," he said, his voice weak but his eyes bright with satisfaction, "I want you to know that being your father was the greatest privilege of my life." Moses held his father's hand as the old rancher passed peacefully into whatever comes next, secure in the knowledge that love had triumphed, that family had conquered fear, and that sometimes the most important battles are won not with guns or force, but with the simple courage to do what's right when the whole world is watching. The preacher had refused to baptize the black orphan boy, but in the end, it was the preacher who was left out in the cold, while the old rancher and his chosen son created a family that would inspire generations to come. Thank you for watching this incredible story of courage, love, and family. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to never miss our amazing true stories that will touch your heart and inspire your soul. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.